But as I mentioned, every class I would love to start with this website, which again, unfortunately, is no longer working, but we're going to use an older version, and that's a timeline. And the timeline is called, what it does is it breaks down the history into periods, which is very helpful. So they call it 1654 to 1776, 1781. We're going to explain all this, and they have little nice pictures here. It's very nice. So what we're going to do today is get ourselves ready for 1654. I don't think we're going to actually talk about 1654 today, but that's when the story begins. The story, as you see here in this website of the American Jewish Historical Society, in 1654, 23 Jewish refugees flee Brazil and the long arm and land in New Amsterdam. I think I need an hour to explain that sentence. Now, I think you all are smart college students. You know what 23 is, you know what Jewish is, you know what Brazil is, you might know what the Inquisition is, and you might know what New Amsterdam is. You might know all that. But I think we need an hour, a good hour, to introduce why this makes sense, what was going on, to get it as well, to understand the history of Jews in the world, understand the history of Jews in America. So every class hopefully will start here. So really, we should start here now. We need about an hour, which will probably be the first class, to get to this point. Okay? So let's begin. And one of the other websites I always use, which I'm sure you're all familiar, called Google Maps. I think Google Maps is one of the greatest inventions. It makes life easier. It's really great. So let us begin. And we're going to begin. Again, there's no assumptions that anyone has to know anything. Please, please stop me if I say a word or a name that I assume people know and you don't. I'm going to English. I'll say it in Hebrew and English. There is no, if you don't know Hebrew or English, well, English is in trouble. If you don't know Hebrew, that's also fine. I'm going to start here. Sorry. Okay, let's start here. But besides that, in the module, there is something called a Jewish timeline. This Jewish timeline is just there for you, in case you wanted to know, timeline of all Jewish history. So we're going to start about here, right here, around 500 BCE, about 500 before the Common Era. And we're going to quickly try to do 2,000 years of history in about an hour. Okay. If you were living in the year 500, let's say 576 BCE, let's go back. I'm sorry. I'm going to go further back. You're living in the year 750 BCE. There are 12 tribes of Jews living in this land here called Land of Israel. The first exile that the Jewish people had was in roughly the year 750. There was a man by the name of Sennacherib. Sennacherib was a king of a country called Assyria, not Syria, Assyria. Syria is here. Assyria is here. The capital city of Assyria is near the modern day city of Mosul, which is in Iraq. And you can still to this day, if I can zoom in, let's see if I get it right. See if I can find it very quickly. I don't read Arabic, but it should be, usually find it pretty quickly. It's out of town. It's not in the town. It's right out of town. It's not in town. It's out of town. Where is it? Well, it's making my life easier. Yeah, it was. Okay. You today, if you're not afraid to go to Iraq, which as an American you might be afraid, there is in the modern city of Mosul, there is still the ruins of the old ancient city called Nineveh. Here it is, and if you go further down, you can go till today, see this castle called the Palace of Sennacherib, King of Assyria. Here is the other palace of Ashurbanipal, how to pronounce it. It's another castle you can go visit. So this city, called today Mosul, on the river, was known back then as the city called Nineveh. So in the year 750 before the Common Era, so that's about 2,700 years ago, the king of Assyria, Sennacherib, Sancherib in Hebrew, traveled through the river, went up the Fertile Crescent, conquered all of what we call Israel, and he tried to conquer everything. He only succeeded in exiling 10 of the 12 tribes. That's why we have a tradition that there are 10 lost tribes. This will be very relevant next time, or maybe even this time. Actually, it'll be relevant today. So there are 10 tribes that were kicked out of the land of Israel and exiled in the year 750 before the Common Era, a long time ago. Sennacherib Sancherib tries to conquer Jerusalem, the remaining 2 tribes of Judah and Benjamin, and the Levites. He fails, and his army is destroyed at the gates of Jerusalem, and the Assyrian conquest is partial. It only captures 2 of the 12 tribes, but not all of the tribes. Okay. Next. So, where were we? Hold on. So, a little bit later, the Assyrians, again, over here, the Assyrians lose world domination to the Babylonians. Babylonians were ruled by a man named Nebuchadnezzar, or Nebuchadnezzar in Hebrew. And Nebuchadnezzar, he actually is successful in destroying the temple. So Nebuchadnezzar comes and he exiles all of the Jews from the land of Israel in the year 576 BCE. You do not need to know that number. No. 90% of the Jewish people were exiled to the land of Babylonia, what we today call Iraq and Iran, in between the rivers, this area here. 10% went here, what is known as Egypt today. Okay, wonderful. It is in this time period that after the Babylonians, we're going to go quickly, that the Persians take over. So the exile happened in the year 576. In about the year 530, the Babylonians stop being the world power and the Persians start being the world power. And therefore, instead of being important to live here, it is important to live here. Now, you all heard of, you might not have all heard of, I'm sorry, that shouldn't make any assumptions. There is a town today called Shush or Susa. You can today, if you don't mind traveling to Iran, again, depending on whether you're nervous or not to travel as an American to Iran, you can go to this place here. Now I'm going to switch views. The view that I'm going to switch to is right? And you can take a look and you can travel, pretend, let's say you're European, you want to see Iran, you're not an American, and you drive down to this Apadana castle in Shush or Susa in Iran. And you will see here a castle. You can still see it till today. You can see it from the sky. Does anybody know whose castle this is? I'm testing your Jewish history. You don't have to know the answer.
Is it Daniel? Because his tomb is right there.
Correct. It is not his castle. Daniel wasn't a king.
He was a prophet?
He was a prophet, correct.
Okay.
Who was the queen that is famous who lived in Iran or in Shushan?
Esther.
That's right.
Achashverosh.
Yes, this is his castle. Literally, this is the actual castle of Achashverosh and Esther. And
all these years, I never knew any of this happened in the
That's
Middle
in
East.
Persia?
This is in Persia. Well, Persia, otherwise known as Iran.
Right, yeah.
It's right there. Now, Daniel, who was an advisor to Esther, right, lived near her, and that is why his tomb, you saw, was right here. Something right up. Tomb of Daniel, right outside the castle. But if you open, this is not a Jewish history class, it's Jewish history, but it's not like a Bible class. But if you open your book of Esther and you read in chapter 1 about this castle and about his garden and about his pillars and about the rooms, it's literally, you can trace it and see it here if you'd like. Pretty cool. People go there with Google Maps. Let me just show you. That's not the castle. Huh?
Professor, what was the land of Israel called at this time?
Well, I'm gonna make a joke, but a bad joke. It was called desolate. That means in after the Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar exiled the Jews, and previously Sennacherib, there were no Jews left. So from the years 576 to about 500, plus or minus, Jews were not allowed to live there.
But what was the country called?
There were countries back then were named after the kingdoms that ruled it. So since there was no kingdom there that ruled it, it was called after the kingdom of it was a state of Babylonia or of Persia. And what's going to happen is, we'll talk about it. We'll get there in 1 second. The Persian king allows the Jews to go and rebuild the land and then have their own kingdom called Kingdom of Israel again. Okay, so this is the story. Here you can go visit. Yeah, I just want to, because sometimes bring my dude. If you bring your little guy and you put him here, you could literally stand there and see what it looked like. Pretty cool. I think it's pretty cool. But this is what it looks like if you would go today. Someone took a picture. This is from 2018. And you could actually walk in Esther's castle and Ahasuerus' castle. Okay. Again, I don't recommend traveling to Iran as an American citizen, or if you are, or not, either way, but I don't recommend it. That being said, it's a pretty cool thing. There's another castle here which the archaeologists built, which is a much later castle. Okay. So as Rena pointed out, in the year 576 to 500, there was almost the Jews of the world lived in everywhere. I'm gonna go just the Jews of the world lived everywhere but the land of Israel. In the year 500 or 470 or somewhere around there, the Jews of Israel, led by a man named the Jews of Babylonia, led by a man named Ezra, came and rebuilt the second temple. Now, the majority of Jews definitely did not follow him, but a very sizable amount of Jews, led by the Rabbi Ezra and the leader called Nehemiah, came and rebuilt the second temple. We have today, right? The second temple we have today, we'll see, is built much later on, but we have till today. If you go to the old city of Jerusalem, you can see the walls of Nehemiah. You can still see some of the remaining walls based on archaeology when they built the fortifications of the city in the year roughly 470 BCE. Everything's great. So we did world powers, Assyria, Babylonia, Persia, and we did the history of exiles and return. So life is good. You're living in the year, let's say 400, 300, let's say 400. You're living in the year 400 BCE, so 2,400 years ago, and very good. There's Persia, there's the Jews built their second temple, they're living great, land of Israel, and now all of a sudden the world's going to get changed. One man changes the world, and he is known as Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great is from a little tiny area here called Macedonia. His father was known as Philip of Macedon. Okay, and today there's a country called North Macedonia. That's a new country that didn't exist for many years. It didn't exist until recently. And Philip of Macedon has a son named Alexander, and he's Alexander the Great because he conquers the known world. What does a known world mean? Alexander the Great conquers, starting here by Greece, conquers all what is known as Turkey, Syria, Israel, Egypt, Iraq, and Iran. All the way he gets to the Gulf, to the Persian Gulf. That is the known world. Again, are there people here? Yes. Are there people here? Yes. Are there people all these places? Of course. But in the world that we know of, that means in Western history, this is the Alexander the Great goes from Greece, from Macedonia, and conquers the world. Now, who was Alexander the Great? Besides being this great ruler, and again, so now you had Assyrians, then the Babylonians, then the Persians, and now the Greeks. Why is Alexander the Great from Macedonia called Greek? Because his teachers and the culture that he was brought up on was the culture of Greece. It was a totally new culture, the most advanced, scientific, philosophical, advanced culture, and that is in Greece. He had famous teachers, Aristotle, who had a teacher Plato, had a teacher Socrates, And since that is the beginning of the Western tradition, the Western thought, and Western philosophy, Alexander the Great is an important person because he introduces the Greek culture to the world. Because he conquers the whole world, the known world, he therefore is he spreads Greek culture. Fast forward a few years, he dies. Alexander the Great dies in the year roughly 333. Everyone loves Alexander the Great, so much so they named many cities after him. One of the famous ones being Alexandria, here over here. And there is a big fight who shall succeed Alexander the Great. There was one man who lived in Syria who felt he should be the ruler, and there was another man living in Alexandria or Cairo who thought that they should be the ruler. And they split up the kingdom. So there was two dynasties that emerged from the Greek dynasty. One was known as the Ptolemaic dynasty, and one was known as the Seleucid dynasty. They always fought. Now, if Syria and Egypt are fighting, where is the common battlefield? Well, that would be smack dab here in this little place called Israel. In roughly, let's say 200 BCE, the Syrian Greeks captured Israel. And they went on a very, very strict campaign to make everyone Greek. And we call that the holiday of Hanukkah, because the Seleucid Greeks, meaning the Seleucid Greeks, descendants of Alexander the Great's generals, one of them being known as Antiochus, right, Antiochus, came down and tried to make everyone living here into Greek citizens and acting Greek, and therefore they went to the temple. They didn't destroy the temple. They went to the temple. They made a mess of it. And there was a miracle. The miracle was 8 days of oil for the menorah. But more important, the miracle was that the small army of the Maccabeans kicked out the Greek kings and the Greek army. And for roughly 200 some odd years, there was Jewish self-rule in the land of Israel until the destruction of the Second Temple. Now, what happened? Who took over from the Greeks? The Romans, right? You all aware, right? You had Julius Caesar, and they took over. He won all these battles against the Greeks, and you had then Octavius, and then you had Marcus. I assume you learned this history at some point in your life. You read Shakespeare, you read Julius Caesar. You know all about how Julius Caesar had battles in Alexandria, that all these battles. Cleopatra, Mark Antony. I don't know if you play with this, but you should be. It's part of history, but if not, it's also good. And in roughly the year, let's say, just for argument's sake, 100 BCE or 50 BCE, the Romans are now the world power. Okay. So I would like to step out and pretend we're living in the year 1 Common Era. Now, I want to point something out. It used to be that we called that everything was called BC, which is before Christ, and year 1 was AD, or Anno Domini, or the year of our Lord. The reason we don't say that is because most people in the world do not consider Jesus as their Lord. So why would you make history as before Christ and the year of our Lord? So therefore, it is common in history today to use the term BCE, before the Common Era, and CE, Common Era. It's just a way of keeping BC and just switching a little bit, and getting rid of, obviously, AD, calling it Common Era. But that was the term. No one woke up on January 1st and said, okay, let's start counting different. That's ridiculous. What happened was, 200 years after Jesus had died, the Christians of the world started dating everything backwards. Okay, he was born this day, and this is when he died, and then because Christianity took over the Western world, therefore that became the standard way of counting. So today we're technically in the year 2022 from year 1, which was either known as Common Era or AD, Anno Domini. But again, it's just random. There's no one, right? Sennacherib didn't say, well, in 570 or 700 something years today, they're going to start counting again year 1. That's obviously ridiculous. What that means, everyone had to count things, like however they counted from creation. If they're Jews, they counted to their gods, to their events, if they're relevant, or to their kings. Most people did not have this worldview of history, so you had random counting. Okay, so now let's play a game. You wake up sometime in December in year one, somewhere here. What did the world look like? What did you know about the world? It's an interesting question. That means there's no question there were millions of people in China and Japan, right? And all over the world, there were billions and millions of people. But what did you know if you lived here? And this is, again, call it a bias, but Western civilization and Western history, this is where it stems from, and this is how it spreads out. So in the year one, there was only about, it's hard to get the number, no, let's say a few 100,000 Jews in the world. Most of them lived in Israel. Some of them lived a little bit here in North Africa, or what we call Babylonia. They were the only people of the world who believed in one God, monotheism. They were the Jews. They had their temple in Jerusalem, and they were the only monotheistic people in the world. There was a world power based in Italy, or what we call Rome, called Romans. They had captured all of this, France, Spain, North Africa, all of Turkey, all of this area was under Roman control. And the Romans at this time worshipped idols. They had Jupiter, and they had, I always get confused with the Roman names and the Greek names. So I'll say the Greek names so it's easier. Zeus, Apollo, Aphrodite, what's her name? Pangea. I just think random names. I know the Greek names a little better. Those are the names of the gods, right? Achilles was a god. Hades was a god. They had just a lot of gods. Okay, and they were the rulers of this area. They were very strong. They were a very big army, and they conquered all of what we know, all of the world that we knew of. That means France, till the Alps. Now, there were many people living in what we call northern here areas. That we call them, right or wrong, we call them barbarians, meaning they were not part of civilization. They weren't conquered by the Romans. We'll talk Romans about that later. And then there were people, tribal people, all throughout Africa, all throughout the Arabian Peninsula, over here also. Again, what we call pagans. The Jews were the only monotheistic religion people in the world. That is on the year one. A little baby is born. His parents name him Jesus. I think they name him Jesus. And about 40 years later, he gets killed. It's important to talk about that for a second, because a lot of Jewish history deals with this. This young man, Jesus, somewhere in his 30s and 40s, he wasn't born in year one. He was born in year 4, but it's irrelevant. That's how they count. In his 30s and 40s, he was killed. Who killed Jesus? So Jesus was killed by the Romans. Why did the Romans kill Jesus? Well, Jesus was, I like to explain this to best, but people don't know. Jesus was the AOC of the year 35. You all know who AOC is? You know who AOC is? The politician, yeah. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You know who she is? You heard of her?
AOC, yeah.
Yeah. So why do I call Jesus the AOC of the year 35?
Of what?
Of the year 35.
Ah, okay.
Why would I, like, that's a silly thing. She's not a god. She's not, no. So I want to explain what Jesus did. In the year 35, when Jesus lived, there was a very big problem. And the problem was that the Romans ruled over this area. And, they didn't enslave the Jewish people, but they made life difficult. And a lot of the Jewish people didn't like Rome being, there was a big, should we revolt, should we not revolt? But more than that, there was a lot of religious fighting. And there were elites, and there were people there was the ruling class, and there were kings. There was a very stratified society. Mr. Jesus did not like that. He was a young man, smart man, didn't like the fact that there was a ruling class. He didn't like the fact that there were people who were always in charge. He wouldn't like people that who oppressed the poor. If you go to Jerusalem today, you go to the Western Wall. There's excavations right by the Western Wall. Let's see if I get a picture right down to the right. Let's see if I get a good picture, which I want to show you. I might get lucky, I might not get lucky. Depends who took the pictures. Depends which pictures they posted on Google Photos. This is a decent one, but this is a better one usually. Here, there we go. Okay, so if you're standing here, you today can go stand right there today. Part of that, those are the stones. If you look here, these are the stones that fell off from the temple when it was destroyed in the year 70. This is the Western Wall approaching the southern corner. Right above here is behind this is what we call the Western Wall we pray. To your left here, I don't know if you can see in this picture, is in this picture, what you see is doorways. This is the actual stones, streets that Jesus walked on, and every other rabbi and Jew who lived in the year 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, until it was destroyed. When you walked here, these were shops. And these shops were the shops right outside the temple. Does anybody want to guess what they sold in the shops right outside the temple?
Animals
Animals. Excellent. Why would they sell animals?
for sacrifices.
For sacrifices. Excellent. So let us say, let's say you lived in Tel Aviv, which didn't exist back then. Let's say you lived in Yaffo, which didn't exist. And you wanted to come to the temple to bring a sacrifice. So you don't bring your sheep with you. Right? That's ridiculous. Because it's hard to bring sheep. There are no cars. So the best thing is take some money and get here. How much does this cost? Did I mention how much this costs?
$1.25.
That's not a bad guess. If you buy it wholesale, it's about 60 cents. If you buy it individual in a pizza store, it's about $2. Right, $2. If you buy it at a Yankee game, how much does this cost?
$8.
$5.
Yeah. So how is it possible? Now, can you imagine if I went on and said, it's insane. I'm going to protest, Madison Square Garden and a Yankee game or concert or wherever. I'll give you a better example. This I buy at Stop and Shop. I buy an 8-pack for $3. That's pretty cheap. So, 40 cents, 50 cents. Yesterday, I was coming back from Manhattan. I was in Penn Station. This cost me $3.25. The same bottle in Stop and Shop is 50 cents, and in Penn Station is $3.25. Is that right?
It is
Why is it right?
because
You're in
people
tourist
in
land.
Penn Station
How
put
was the
more
loss of
effort.
time?
Jesus got upset. He says, if I wanted to buy a sheep in Yaffo or in Bethlehem, a sheep costs two zuz. You know how much sheep cost right outside the temple?
10?
10 zuz.
Okay.
That's right. I don't know exactly. I'm giving a round number. Jesus, it bothered him. It bothered him. Like people. Hold on 1 second, everyone. Hold on, give me 1 second. I have. School hasn't started yet, so my daughter is home. What are you going to do, right? I think school starts next week, so we'll be quiet. Okay, so this really, really, really bothered Mr. Jesus. Makes sense. It also bothered him that the elites, whether they were the Pharisees or whatever they were, that they controlled the temple. So he was using another term, is a muckraker. He called out all the elites and he told them, this is ridiculous the way you're running the world. And he blows it all up. You know who hates people who blow things up? Or, right? The elites. The Romans were like, we don't like this guy because he's telling everyone that the elites are bad. So the Jews and the running the temple didn't like him because he was making everything crazy. So what happened? He got killed. Now again, he was also a believer in Judaism. He was a monotheist. He was born a Jew. He spoke Hebrew. He spoke Aramaic. He read the Jewish Bible. He did all of that because he was Jewish. But a lot of people like him existed. What do I mean? Let me go back. Right outside of Jerusalem, there's an ancient city called Jericho, Jericho in Hebrew. It's over here. And there were hundreds and hundreds of sects or people in sects that believed that the world's going to change and be better and a Messiah is coming, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they all lived here or around here. And there was lots of these people. And that's why we have the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is not a class in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but if you go here till today, you can go visit what it's like, or you can actually see the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Israeli Museum. The point was, Mr. Jesus was annoying to all the leaders, and he got killed. Okay, that's the end of the story. But now, let's remember, in the year that he got killed, in the year 40, the only people of the world who were monotheistic were the Jews. Now let's fast forward 300 years. Rome becomes Christian. That means the emperor in Rome converts everybody under Roman rule into Christianity. And he declares that the new seat, the place for this is Rome. That'll be St. Peter's, and Peter being the first pope, meaning the disciple of Jesus. And now all of this, Spain, France, Italy, all of the Balkans, Turkey, North Africa, all of this area becomes Christian in one day almost. They were Romans. The Romans were pagans. And all of a sudden, the emperor in Rome, Constantine, that's irrelevant, his name, switches everybody in Rome, and all of the areas that Rome controlled become Christian. So now, if you wake up on January 1st, the year 400, it's no longer the Jews that are the monotheists, also this part of the world. And I skipped something. Let me go back. I'm sorry. I went too ahead of myself. In the year 70, Rome destroys the temple in Jerusalem and exiles all the Jews. Again, like last time when the Jews were exiled, a very sizable majority of the Jews end up in Babylonia over here. However, that's not only true. Many Jews went to North Africa. Many Jews went to Rome. Today, the chief rabbi of Rome, let's look up his chief rabbi Rome Deceni. I spelled the name wrong as always. Oh, I tell you right. There's a man, he's the chief rabbi of Rome. His name is Riccardo Deceni. He's also a doctor. Chief Rabbi Deceni claims, and now it's hard to prove, that his family has been in Rome since the year 70. That's pretty impressive. And there are such people. I don't know if it's him specifically. There are people who have been in the city of Rome since the year 70, which again, and Jews were exiled from Israel. A lot went to Babylonia. the majority, but there were Jews everywhere now. Jews in France, Jews in Spain, but again, very, very small amount of people, but some. But the majority of the Jews stayed in Israel and went north to what is called the Galilee. Right, that became a very big Jewish settlement until that was destroyed about 200 years later. But this also became, that's why you have a lot of stuff going on here. Again, that's why you also don't forget when Jesus lived, he went a lot to the Galilee to preach. He was born in Nazareth. Okay, all good and fine. Wonderful. So the Jews are now living here, in this area here called Babylonia, Iran, Iraq, Persia, whatever word you want to use. They're living here. Everything is great. Now, let's remember that we said the northern part of the world became Christian. It means North Africa, all of this, Europe, Turkey, all became Christian. Then came a man who came next, Mr. Muhammad, right? When was he born? He was born in the 500s and he died somewhere in the 630s. Muhammad lived here in Saudi Arabia, right? Medina, Mecca, all these places here. He will, go over all, say all the history of Islam in 1 second. He also becomes monotheistic, and his people, his descendants, and the kings and the rulers all become monotheistic, and they conquer all of this. So, from the year 1, when only the Jews were monotheistic, to the year 900, the world changed. Somewhere in the year 300, all of this became Christian monotheists, and somewhere between the year 630 and 750, with the conquest of the Muslims, all of this became monotheistic Muslims. Now, there is a problem. What's the problem? The problem goes like this. If I have 10 gods, and Ivan has 10 gods, and Eric has 10 gods, we could be friends. Because I have 10, so there's no difference between 9 and 10 and 11 or 20 or 30. So I have 10 gods, you have 10 gods, you have 10 gods. I think my gods are better than your gods, you think your gods are better than my gods. We all get along, because at the end of the day, we all got a bunch of gods, who cares? But if I have one God, and you have one God, and it's not the same person, what's the problem? We're fighting who's right. In other words, if I was a pagan and you were a pagan, we can get along. You'll take your animal and sacrifice it to the god of fire, and I'll take my animal and sacrifice it to the god of water. We'll see who wins. Sometimes fire, sometimes water. Everyone gets along. But you have the one true God, and I have the one true God. There's a problem. There's a big problem. Therefore, Christians and Muslims fought with each other constantly. And what happened was, so where does Christianity and Islam meet? Well, they meet here in Israel. We'll talk about that in a second. But they also meet here in Spain, because the Muslims conquer all of Africa, and the Muslims go across the Straits of Gibraltar and start invading south of Spain, or in Muslims called Andalusia. So you have here in this peninsula, you have Christians in the north and Muslims in the south. And here, over here, you have, again, besides the Jews, if you're Jews, you have Muslims claiming this, again, Muslims saying that Jerusalem is holy to them. You have Christians, all the Christians here saying that Jerusalem is holy to them. And this is where they fight. There are two places, basically, and also here they fight everywhere. But these are the two main points where these two monotheistic religions fought with each other. Okay. Now let's
Wait, I have a
fast forward.
question.
Go ahead.
What, and this is like a completely like a genuine question, like what events took place in Israel that the Muslims still claim it until today for them,
So
if
the
their leader was born in another part?
Well, again, yes, in a way, Jesus lived in Israel, so the Christians considered it holy, and But according to Islamic tradition, there's no question that Muhammad was focused his area here, but there is something that he went to this holy place, he tied his horse. Again, we're not studying Islam, why they believe it or what how did it come to be, but according to Muslim tradition, there was a connection of Muslims to Jerusalem. Now I don't want to be cynical. I want to be right clear that again, there's no question Muhammad was based here. Why would he claim that he visited here and was holy there? And again, the proof that the Muslims held it holy is the fact that they, throughout the centuries, built there and they built, the mosques there. Let's remember, Christianity is built on the Jewish guy who started a new monotheistic religion, Jesus and his disciples. Muhammad, to become monotheistic, he too had to get it from somewhere. He can't make up monotheism. So Muhammad got it from the Jews because they were the monotheistic people. Now, this is very important, and a lot of people don't understand this, and this is not relevant to this class, but it's relevant to understanding. Both Christians and Muslims have a problem. And again, I'm sort of putting my rabbi hat on in a second, but it's important. There's a problem. If I'm a Christian or a Muslim, I have a very big problem. We all admit that what's called the Old Testament of the Bible is true. And there were Jews, and those were the people that God spoke to first. There is no question that the Christians believe that and the Muslims believe. So Christianity and Islam has a problem. And the problem is, well, if God spoke to them first and he gave them the Bible, how do we know that he wants what we do? Right? That's a very logical question. No, I think it's a very good question. And it was one of the reasons why throughout history, Jews rejected Christianity and Islam. He said, listen, God spoke to us. He didn't tell us he changed his mind. So why should we ever think that you're saying is true? What happens is Christianity says no. And again, we're not here to talk about the religion, but with Jesus and with crucifixion and with blah, 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 God changed his mind and there's a new religion, a new way of doing Judaism. And that's called Christianity. And I'm going to write a new Bible. And when Jesus came to the world, God changed his mind and there's something new. And that's what Christianity means. Muhammad did the same thing. Muhammad came along and it's sort of like, we're going to learn about this in like 3 weeks about Mormons. But Muhammad came along and said, listen, for sure, God spoke to the Jews. And not that, there were Christians. You know what? They all got it 90%. They didn't listen well. At the Mount of Sinai, they didn't listen well. They got it mostly right, but not 100%. God has come to me, Muhammad, and said, listen, I already spoke to this guy Moses and to Jesus, and they heard, but the people didn't get it right. I'm asking you, Muhammad, to tell the people what I really, really am saying, because they only got it 90% right. So in other words, on one hand, all monotheistic religions believe in the same thing, that God spoke to a prophet and told him what he wants. All Christianity in Islam says the Jews got it, made mistakes. They got it wrong. And this is one of the most important parts of Islamic of theology is that the Jews corrupted, and Christians, but corrupted the Bible. And that's why, by the way, again, I don't want to talk, again, this is a little bit off topic. You'll go to a Muslim and say, hello, Jerusalem, it says it in my Bible. Indoctrinated into Islam is that the Jews have a corrupt Bible. Because the only way they can believe in their religion is by saying that their religion is true and Muhammad got it right. Well, Muhammad got it right. What happened to all the Jews who were living at his time? Well, they must have had a corrupted version. So you can't argue Bible to a Muslim because he believes that you have a corrupted. Okay, so it's a very important point which most people don't understand. Yeah, okay, but I went a little bit off topic. I'm sorry, but it's good to know. So if you were living in the year 950 Common Era, so about 1,000 years ago from today, what did the world look like? Well, the world looked like it was pretty similar what the world looked like. North Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, Iran, Iraq were Muslim. Not Iran. See, Iran, very interesting. Iran stayed pagan for a very long time until they became Muslim. And bottom of Spain, Islam. Top of Spain, France, Germany, Austria, Italy, Romania, all of this, Greece, Turkey, all of this, Christian. We're not going to go into the different Christians, just Christian. Let's leave it at that. And the Jews were living in Babylonia. And around the year 950, it became very, very difficult to live here. The Persians and the Babylonians and the Muslims made it very, very, very difficult for Jews to live in what is known as Babylonia. And there were two main and three places that the Jews could have gone. A very small side portion went to live here, which is where, the Christians lived, France, Germany. Another portion went to North Africa and Spain. In Hebrew, we call this area Ashkenaz, and Spain is called Sfarad. In the year 1000, the Jewish community split up. While originally, from the time of the destruction, for about 900 years, almost everyone lived here in this area called Babylonia or Bavel. Almost everyone left and went to either Ashkenaz, Northern Europe, or Spain and North Africa. Now, truth be told, there are other terms for North African Jews. However, for whatever reason, the term Sephardi has taken hold. Sephardi literally means this area here. And all of these Jews in Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, Libya, Egypt were not Sephardim. They had nothing to do with Spain. For reasons that we'll talk about some other time, we today call everyone Sephardim. But it's not true, they're not. And then there's some people who stayed in Iran, and those were like Persian Jews. And then there were some Persian Jews who eventually went north and went to this area here, and there were what we call Bukharian Jews. Okay, but the majority of Jews left this area of the world and went to either Northern Europe or North Africa and Spain. Okay, and that is where we get Ashkenazim and Sephardim. It only started roughly in the year 950, so about 1,000 years ago. It was a split, and you had the Jews of North Africa, just North Europe and North Africa and Spain. Okay, I know this is a lot. You'll bear with me. Okay. Remember I said that the Christians and the Muslims really didn't like each other, right? Give me 10 seconds. Wait, actually 20 seconds. Do you all see the video? You all see this video? Yeah? Okay, great.
Yeah.
We're not going to watch it. It's 26 minutes, but.
In the Middle Ages, Europe and the Middle East were divided between Christian states, or Christendom, and Muslim states. They were uneasy neighbors and frequently at war. On the front line, the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire, the major Christian power in the Eastern Mediterranean. But in the 11th century, a powerful new force emerged that threatened its very survival. The Seljuk Turks, originally from Central Asia, migrated south, converted to Sunni Islam, and carved out a great empire for themselves. In 1071, at the Battle of Manzikert, the Seljuk Turks inflicted a crushing defeat on the Byzantine Empire. They went on to conquer most of Anatolia. Cities such as Nicaea and Antioch, rich in Christian history, fell to the Seljuk Turks.
I want to point out, that this city here called Nicaea. Nicaea is in Turkey. It is one of the most important Christian cities. Now today, Turkey is a Muslim country, so everyone forgets that Nicaea was the council. That's why I say it's good to know. The Council of Nicaea was the council that instituted the Christian calendar, and instituted and gave up all the rules of Christianity. So the Christianity was instituted in Nicaea, and just people like we ask them like, where was Christianity born? I mean, where did the council that determined a lot of Christianity? In Nicaea. Nicaea is in northern Turkey. But again, this was all Christian. It's part of Europe technically, not really.
In 1092, the great Seljuk Sultan Malik Shah died, and his empire began to fragment. The Byzantine Empire came under renewed attack as local warlords sought territory and plunder. In 1095, Byzantine Emperor Alexius I Comnenus wrote to Pope Urban II, making a desperate appeal for military aid from his fellow Christians in the West. It wasn't the first such appeal by the emperor, but this time the results would be unlike anything ever seen before. Pope Urban saw the emperor's appeal as a golden opportunity, a chance to heal the rift that had emerged between Western and Eastern churches in the Great Schism, to assert his own papal authority over the unruly barons and bishops of Western Christendom, and to drive back the infidel and reclaim Christianity's most holy sites, most of all Jerusalem, lost to Muslim rule 400 years before.
So, in the year, I'll leave that open. In the year 1095, 1096, really, 1095 they announced it. The Pope announced a crusade. Crusade is related to the word cross, and that they were going to back to Jerusalem, if you can see it here, and they were going to take it back from the Muslims. Because remember, as I said before, Muslims and Christians, monotheistic religions, can't get along because they argue which is the real monotheistic religion, and they argue who gets the Holy Land. And again, to make your point, Rena, Jews aren't part of this question. There are no Jews. I mean, there are very few, like 20 of them in the whole, Israel, 50. It's irrelevant. In the year 1095, 1096, it's the question: is it an Islamic holy city or a Christian holy city?
But my question was that Jews actually had history there.
Correct.
It's known. They've built temples. They've practiced their religion there.
Right.
What claims do other religions have on the country? What
Jesus,
events happen?
Well, Jesus lived there, and he also worshipped in the temple, and he made a lot of his speeches there. And Muslims believe that we corrupted our Bible, and secondly that that was holy to them. The point is that my point is that even in the year already in the year 680 or 690, they already captured Jerusalem and considered it holy. So it's not for us to think why they believe that. That's what they believe. Okay. And this is known as the Crusade. The first Crusade, let's go back to our map. The first Crusade started in Clermont. That's where he announced it. Clermont, France, which is here. And the Crusaders were gonna go travel. Where's really going to travel from north? They're going to travel towards the Holy Land, and they're going to conquer the Holy Land from the Muslims and return it to Christianity. Now, does anybody know how the best way to travel from here to there? How do you travel from France to Israel? Anybody know the best way to travel?
Sea. No?
Right, water. Right, you always travel by water. So the problem is you can't go this way straight down because there's the Alps and stuff like that, and this is really not a friendly area. So they came up with a better plan. They were actually going to go. They started in northern France here. They were going to start around here, go down the Rhine River, end up around Venice. No, about Venice. No, sorry. They were gonna the Rhine River to the river Danube here, and then end up here by Istanbul and then cross over and then travel down to Jerusalem. Again, their boats weren't that great. Now, for Jewish history, it's important to know that on the way down, the Crusaders made see, here's the river, the Rhineland River. They made a logical assumption. Why are we going down and trying to get rid of the infidels, the horrible Muslims in the Holy Land, when we have horrible Jews who live amongst us? So what happened was, in the year 1096, the spring and summer, the Crusaders, on their way to the Holy Land, in the cities of Mainz and in the cities of Speyer and in the city of Worms was north, Worms and other places. Where's Worms? So along the river here, so I always forget. So they killed hundreds and hundreds of Jews. Now that doesn't seem like a lot, hundreds of hundreds, especially in the modern era when we've had the Holocaust. But hundreds of Jews back then represented almost half of the population of Ashkenaz. And over the next 300, 400 years, the Jews of Ashkenaz would be killed and persecuted and pogromed over and over and over and over again. Okay. And throughout Christian Europe, starting with the Crusades in 1096, Christianity started being more and more and more persecuting of the Jews, until eventually all the Jews went east to Poland, to this area, and there was almost no Ashkenazi Jews left in Ashkenaz. In the year 1290, all the Jews were kicked out of England. In the year 1306, all the Jews were kicked out of Spain. Sorry, I wasn't sharing my screen. In 1290, all the Jews were kicked out of London, all of Spain, and here, out of France. And then all the 1300s, Jews were persecuted and kicked out of all of Ashkenaz. Now, let's go back a second. As I said, there were Jews living under Islamic rule in the North Africa and in Spain. For example, there's a city in the south of Spain called Cordoba or Cordova. In the city of Cordoba, you can go visit today. You see there's a mosque here. Why is there a mosque, Cathedral of Cordoba? Because this originally was a Muslim city. Who was born in Cordoba? Anybody know which famous Jewish person born in Cordoba? Anyone? I always have a very hard time.
Rambam?
Yes, very good. Maimonides, Rambam was born in Cordoba. That's why there's a synagogue here. And right near there there's a statue of Maimonides. I always forget where it is. I'm just going to put it in. Let's see if I can find it. There it is. See, it's right there. Okay. Because Maimonides was born in Cordoba. Maimonides was living in Cordoba under Islamic rule. Now, Maimonides. Now, it has to be said that it really was much better for the Jews at this period of time, 1000, 1100, 1200, 1300. It was much better under Muslim rule than in Christian rule. So in Christian Ashkenaz, very bad for the Jews, 11, 12, 1300. And in Muslim North Africa and the bottom of Spain, pretty good for the Jews, except for 1 or 2 years. Well, we'll leave that out of the story. Now comes the very important part. If you weren't listening until now, start listening now. 1492. Ferdinand and Isabella conquer all of Spain or Andalusia and kick out all the Muslims. So from the year 700, 800, the Muslims were control of the bottom half of Spain, and the Christians had the top half of Spain. And at some point, the Muslims almost made it to Barcelona, almost. But by the year 1492, the Christians had kicked out all the Muslims. And they said the same thing to Crusaders in the year 1096. if we got rid of all the Muslims, let's get rid of all the Jews. Because again, if you're Christian, you don't like Muslims and Jews. If you're Muslims, you don't like Christians and Jews. So just like the Crusaders wanted to kick the Muslims out of the Holy Land, and then they also wanted to get rid of the Jews, so too the Christians of Spain successfully kicked out the Muslims in war, and then declared that in 1492, all the Jews had to leave. Now, really, already in 1391, they'd announced it, but in 1492, they had gone even further and expelled every Jew from Christian Spain. 5 years later, the king of Portugal agreed as well. He wanted to marry their daughter, and now this whole peninsula called the Iberian Peninsula, all the Jews were kicked out, except the Jews didn't want to go. They didn't want to go. So you have a problem. In Spain, in Europe, in the year 1096 at 1100, 1200, the Jews said they weren't even given a choice to go. They were choice to convert, and they were killed. Thousands and thousands and thousands of Jews were killed because in Ashkenaz, because they refused to become Christians. By the way, I don't know if you are Ashkenaz. I am Ashkenaz. If you are Ashkenaz, both of your parents are Ashkenaz, even one of your parents are Ashkenaz, you should not get married before you do genetic testing. Why? Because Ashkenazi Jews were so persecuted over and over through the hundreds of years. Every Ashkenazi Jew is related himself 10 times. And whichever the partner he chooses to marry, wife or husband, will genetically be your 10th, 12th, 15th, 18th cousin. But not only that, because of all the persecutions, there was very, very little genetic diversity among Ashkenazi Jews. And therefore, Ashkenazi Jews are carriers of many, many, many genetic mutations and diseases. Therefore, if you're an Ashkenazi Jew, you plan on getting married, even if you're marrying a non-Ashkenazi, nevertheless, you should have yourself genetically tested because you are a carrier of something or other problem. Now, the
But
same is
Middle
true.
Eastern Jews have the same problems these days.
Now, again, all Jews have problems because all Jews were killed and they all married each other. Eventually, they're all cousins, so mutations, spread out in the population. But Ashkenazi Jews have it the worst because they were persecuted the most. Okay, that's just as an aside. So I wanted to make everyone aware of that because it's a good thing to know. This class is taking a lot longer than I thought. Okay, maybe we might not finish everything we wanted to do today. That's okay. Okay. 2:12. So a few more minutes. Back to our story. In 1492, the Jews of Spain were kicked out. However, the majority, half, whatever the number is, but a lot, tens and tens of thousands of Jews who lived in Spain did not leave. And they said, you know what? We'll be Christian. We'll be Christian. You want us to be Christian? We'll be Christian. No problem. No problem. We'll stay here. What do we got to do? You got to go to church on Sunday. We'll go to church on Sunday. You gotta, okay, whatever you want, we'll do. Now, many of them meant it sincerely, but many of the Jews who said they'll be Christians didn't really believe all of a sudden. Oh, I believe. Didn't believe. And especially in Portugal, where the Portuguese leader only wanted to kick out the Jews because he had forced by the Spaniards because he wanted to marry their daughter. He didn't want the Jews to leave. So he gathered them all together. He sprinkled some water on them and said, you're all Jewish today. You're all Christian today. Ha. Now you can all stay. So you have tens and tens of thousands of people who yesterday were Jews and today are Christians. Now, what's the problem with that? Well, if you're a Christian, that really bothers me. I don't believe that guy. He's not really Christian. I don't believe that woman. I don't believe she's really Christian either. They say they're Christian, but they're not. So these new Christians, that's one term. There are three terms we use for these people. Either new Christians, that's the nicest term. There's a term Marranos, which comes from the word pig, which is like a derogatory term. And there's the other Hebrew term called anusim, or forced Christians. So there are tens of thousands of people living in Spain and Portugal who outwardly are Christian, but Friday night they go into the closet and they light candles, and they circumcise their boys, and they fast on a day in October, and they don't eat bread for a week in the spring. They're Jews secretly, but outwardly they're Christians. And the Christian church hates this, because what did they gain? Not, they didn't get the Jews out. They now have all these Jews who are hiding. So they form an office called the Office of the Inquisition. What is the point of the Office of the Inquisition? The point of the Office of the Inquisition
It's 1481. In the city of Seville, devout Catholics are turning themselves in to the authorities. They're confessing to heresy, failure to follow the beliefs of the Catholic Church. But why? The Spanish Inquisition has arrived in Seville. The Inquisition began in 1478, when Pope Sixtus IV issued a decree authorizing the Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, to root out heresy in the Spanish kingdoms, a confederacy of semi-independent kingdoms in the area that would become the modern country of Spain. Though the order came from the Church, the monarchs had requested it. When the Inquisition began, the Spanish kingdoms were diverse, both ethnically and religiously, with Jews, Muslims, and Christians living in the same regions. The Inquisition quickly turned its attention to ridding the region of people who were not part of the Catholic Church. It would last more than 350 years. On the ground, groups called tribunals ran the Inquisition in each region. Roles on a tribunal could include an arresting constable, a prosecuting attorney, inquisitors to question the accused, and a scribe. A Grand Inquisitor, a member of the clergy selected by the king and queen, almost always led a tribunal. The Inquisition marked its arrival in each new place with an Edict of Grace. Typically lasting 40 days, the Edict of Grace promised mercy to those who confessed to heresy. After that, the inquisitors persecuted suspected heretics on the basis of anonymous accusations. So the confessors in Seville probably didn't see themselves as actual heretics. Instead, they were hedging their bets by reporting themselves when the consequences were low, rather than risking imprisonment or torture if someone else accused them later on. They were right to worry. Once the authorities arrested someone, accusations were often vague, so the accused didn't know the reasons for their arrest or the identity of their accuser. Victims were imprisoned for months or even years. Once arrested, their property was confiscated, often leaving their families on the street. Under these conditions, victims confessed to the most mundane forms of heresy, like hanging linen to dry on a Saturday. The Inquisition targeted,
in other words, being Jews. They're trying to be like,
different subsets of the
this video is trying to be a little politically correct.
population over time. In 1492, at the brutal Grand Inquisitor Tomás de Torquemada's urging, the monarchs issued a decree giving Spanish Jews 4 months to either convert to Christianity or leave the kingdom. Thousands were expelled, and those who stayed risked persecution. Converts to Christianity, known as conversos, weren't even safe, because authorities suspected them of practicing Judaism in secret. The hatred directed at conversos was both religious and economic, as conversos made up a large portion of the upper middle class. The Inquisition eventually shifted its focus to the moriscos, converts to Christianity from Islam.
Yeah, eventually there was no Jews left. Okay, so Blake, in 1492, so let's go back to the map for a second. So if we were living in, let's say, 1550, in 1550, where would Jews be located in the world? Well, you'd have 1550, a lot of Jews would be left Western Europe, went to Eastern Europe. In 1550, there was a little there was a lot of Jews who left Spain and lived in Turkey, and even started living in North Israel called Sfas. Had a lot of Jews who lived in North Africa. Had some Jews out here in Iran, Iraq, in Babylonia, Persia. And that is where the Jews of the world live. There are very few Jews here in the northern part of Western Europe. And there were no Jews at all in Spain, except all the thousands and thousands of Marranos, Conversos, Anusim, who were hiding as Jews here. I wasn't showing you that. I feel bad for everyone, and it's 2:20, and I have been talking for quite a long time. So even though I plan to get to 1654 today, we're gonna end now with the Inquisition, and therefore there won't be any homework. And we will start next week here, and hopefully do a lot more next week. I think that was a lot for day one, in my opinion. On that note, I wish you a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.